morning and welcome to Bloomberg TV Philippines' ongoing special coverage of the 31st ASEAN Summit and related meetings. Right now, you're looking at live pictures of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres being welcomed into the main plenary hall at the CCP for the official kickoff of the ASEAN Summit. Next up, you have South Korean President Moon Jae-in walking into the main plenary hall of the CCP, being welcomed by President Duterte and his common-law wife, Hanilet Avansenia. That's President Moon Jae-in of South Korea participating as well in the East Asia Summit happening on Tuesday. And right now, you've got the Thai Prime Minister, General Prayut Chan-o-cha, accompanied by his wife, walking into the main hall of the CCP, again being welcomed by President Duterte and his common-law wife, Hanilet Avansenia. That's Thai Prime Minister, General Prayut Chan-o-cha. That's Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi now walking into the main hall of the CCP, being greeted by President Duterte. Again, that's Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's here to participate in the East Asia Summit, kicking off the back of the 31st ASEAN Summit. And there we have Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the ever-popular diplomat, shaking hands with President Duterte and Hanilet Avansenia. Prime Minister Trudeau making quite the splash yesterday when he dropped by a Jollibee branch. That's in North Harbour, taking some selfies with some of the patrons there as well. And now we have Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull walking into the halls to be greeted by President Duterte. Prime Minister Turnbull also has a pretty hectic schedule today. He is set to engage in a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at around 10:30 this morning. It's a DSWD NROC branch in Pasay later today with DSWD Undersecretary Emmanuel Leko. All right, and now we have Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi being welcomed into the main hall of the CCP by President Duterte. Now, Aung San Suu Kyi, of course, delivered the keynote address at yesterday's kickoff ceremony for the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit, where she talked about how women in Myanmar have always been at the forefront of business and economic reforms that they're trying to implement across the country. And there we have Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak walking into the hall together with his wife Rosmah Mansor, being greeted by President Duterte and Hanilit Avancenia. Prime Minister Najib, of course, no stranger to the Philippines. He was just here earlier this year to speak at the ASEAN Business Advisory Council's Prosperity for All Summit, where he highlighted the importance of the region coming together to fight extremism and making sure that SMEs get a fair chance. And that's Indonesian President Joko Widodo being greeted by President Duterte. Popularly known as Jokowi back in Indonesia. He is also no stranger to the Philippines, having visited the last time for the last Leaders Summit back in April for ASEAN. And that's Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, together with his wife, Madam Ho Ching, being welcomed into the ASEAN plenary hall. Singapore takes over the chairmanship of the ASEAN from the Philippines, where they have already pledged to highlight the need for collaboration and deeper integration as the region heads off the terror threats and extremism. And there you have Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe getting a warm welcome from President Duterte. The two have met a number of times now, the last time being when President Duterte flew off to Tokyo on a 3-day state visit at the end of October, wherein Japan pledged 1 trillion yen in development aid to the Philippines. And on your screens right now, you're seeing the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev being greeted by President Duterte. Again, not the first time the two leaders are meeting. Duterte did manage to get a chance to catch him briefly back in May before Duterte's official state visit was truncated because of the outbreak, because of the fighting that broke out in Marawi. The day is just about to kick off, and lots going on all around the metro. Right now, let's head out over to our correspondent, Bev Natividad, who's standing by at the International Media Center at the World Trade Center. Bev, it's a jam-packed day for all of us. What are you looking forward to?
Reg, yes, it's a jam-packed day. As you can see behind me, and you probably see that in the monitor, today is opening ceremony day, and leaders, ASEAN leaders, plus their dialogue partners and the leaders of those countries are already flocking to the CCP complex. And today, almost all events are at the PICC. There's a lot more in store. A Philippine-U.S. bilateral, for one, that will happen, of course, just before lunchtime. And as with the last ASEAN Leaders Summit, after these arrivals and the opening ceremony, the leaders will be sitting down for a summit plenary right after that. That will happen at around 10 in the morning. And of course, the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, or the ABAC, will have a chance to have an interface with the ASEAN leaders also today. And that just means that the ABAC leaders, headed, of course, by Mr. Joey Concepcion, the presidential advisor for entrepreneurship of Mr. Duterte, will have a chance to be able to report back to the ASEAN leaders as to what they have achieved this year, the chairmanship year of the Philippines for the ASEAN, and they will be able to share that to the public on Tuesday. Also, there will be ASEAN summits, so between ASEAN and countries like Korea, Japan, and the US. The leaders of these countries, of course, will also see at the opening ceremony. But if I may just backtrack a bit, yesterday I'd like to remind everyone that the ASEAN also signed its newest free trade agreement, and that's with Hong Kong. So actually, two agreements were signed. That's an FTA and an investment agreement with Hong Kong. And two leaders, the two trade minister who spoke yesterday, Mr. Edward Yao, the Commerce Secretary of Hong Kong, and also the Trade Secretary of the Philippines, Mr. Ramon Lopez, said that the deal is quite historic. And not only that, it's a strong statement, a loud and clear vote, if I may just quote Mr. Edward Yao, in the face of protectionist sentiments that is happening globally. And of course, much more important than that, there will also be bilaterals with the Philippines. The Philippines will have a chance to have bilaterals not only with the U.S. but also with Korea, India, and Russia. And of course, as I said a while ago, the ABIS, the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit, will also be happening today. And that summit will be headlined by three leaders: Mr. Medvedev, Dmitry Medvedev of Russia, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and of course Moon Jae-in of South Korea. That's the latest from us here, Reg. Back to you.
All right, that was Bev Natividad reporting live at the IMC at the World Trade Center in Pasay. All right now we're looking at live pictures once more of the arrivals. We have Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen walking into the halls of the CCP, being greeted by President Duterte. All right, at this moment, let's head out now to another location. We've got Sean Yao, who's down for us at the Soler Casino and Resort for the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit. Also a jam-packed day over there. Sean, what do you have? What are you seeing?
Hello, Reg. That's right. Good morning. We are here at the reception area of the Grand Ballroom here in Soler in Pasay City, where, they're trying to get things underway, but I think things are a little bit late based from what I heard from you. The leaders are still arriving over there at the CCP complex. Here in Soler, there's a lot of the business community is here. We've seen a lot of them at the prior ASEAN Business summits, and for today's ASEAN Business and Investment Summit, last night they did launch the mentorship program. So today, I'm going to break it down for you very, very simply. 3 fora and 3 keynote speakers. So let's do the forums first. First up will be the Build one on infrastructure. Second will be on human capital development, focusing on empowering women economically. And the third this afternoon will be on inclusive business, right money, open markets. It's going to be about the digital economy. It's going to have Central Bank Governor Nestor Espinilla. And so moving on to the 3 forums that we're going to be having today. The the 3 keynote speakers. First off is Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. And this comes on the heels of his bilateral meeting in APEC with Duterte and with President Vladimir Putin of Russia as well. Now, Harry Roque said when they were in Da Nang that we are bound to sign a bunch of agreements with Russia in education, transportation, and energy. However, the Department of National Defense did clarify that we're not signing any military cooperation agreements, no defense agreements rather, but military cooperation will probably be discussed, as well as lots of trade deals across the board. Now, the second keynote speaker will be South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Moon Jae-in, he's kind of new after Park Geun-hye. So previously, no big relationship with President Duterte yet. He did say, though, interestingly enough, something about the death of Korean businessman Ji Ik-ju. Remember that Subic debacle. He's also here to attend the East Asia Summit, of course. And of course, the third keynote speaker we have is Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. He is going to be here for the India-ASEAN Summit as well as the East Asia Summit. He also came from Vietnam. So for today, if you can see, people are still milling about outside the Soler Grand Ballroom. So we're a little bit off schedule. You can ring me back for more updates as the day progresses. But yeah, we're just waiting on ASEAN Business Advisory Council Chair Joey Concepcion to kick off the events with his keynote. Back to you guys at the studio.
All right, that was Sean Yao reporting live for us there from the Soler Resort and Casino in Pasay, where we're waiting any minute now for the official kickoff of the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit. Right now, we'll toss you back to live pictures coming from the CCP, where we have another arrival. This is Lao Prime Minister. I apologize for that. Lao Prime Minister Thongloun Sisoulith. Lao Prime Minister Thongloun Sisoulith right there, together with President Duterte at the CCP. Well, you know what? The ASEAN Summit may be in high gear today, but, so are the markets. The markets are not closed after all. So let me bring my co-anchor JP back in today. JP, I know you've been monitoring the markets all morning. How is it looking? Is it busy today?
Well, Reg, we're going to always see how the markets actually act later on. But as we know, it is a holiday, but the PSE decided to come into work. Well, how might the PSE fare over these next few days? Well, let's get somebody in to actually help us parse through the PSE's chances from here to Wednesday. Right now, I'm joined from the Manila Bureau by Manisha Aliceres. We know she's the Chief Equity Strategist at the DA Market Securities, and she's live from the Manila Bureau. Nisha, hello. Look, there's no rest for the wicked today for analysts, and those November 13 to 15 are special non-working days. The PSE seems to remain open. Is the appetite going to be a bit muted on the trading floors over the next few days, or still business as usual, you think?
I would say business as usual, and I think it's quite interesting to see how markets will react as developments in the ASEAN conferences unfold. For example, I think there's an expectation that there would be development on visa on arrival in Mactan International Airport. So related to that is mega-wide. Developments like that would be very interesting, and I think we might be able to see some kind of impact on markets.
Usually, though, Nisha, at times when half the country, or when you see these non-working holidays, we tend to see thinner trading volumes. Do you think that might be the case later on, though, when the markets start to warm up?
Sure. Well, a cost for the lower volume could also be because earnings season is actually kind of tapering off as well. We're moving towards the holiday season, so there could be an impact on that. In terms of, let's say, impact on strategy and policy, then you might be able to see that. But yes, volume, I could agree, could also taper off.
Right. Nisha, it's also a pretty funny time for global equities because it's not just the PSE hitting all-time highs on multiple occasions recently. If you look at the charts, you've got the U.S. markets also doing the same. The same can be said about the MSCI Asia Pacific Index. With all of this exuberance, do you think we might be at a risk of seeing a correction anytime soon in global equities and even here at the PSE?
Sure. I think what we're seeing today is really just a confirmation of the global bull market that we've been waiting for. We're in a different phase in the market right now, so having bottomed out and then recovered and then kind of improved on earnings, we're actually at this bull market, and so that's quite interesting. At the same time, though, markets have rallied very generously for the year, and we do think that we could actually be undergoing a correction today. There's a consolidation for the Philippines, for example. There's a consolidation range that we're looking at. 8.1 is a support, while 8.6, the recent high, is a resistance, and so I think that a correction is possible. If you take a look at individual stocks, they've actually have begun corrective movements, but at the same time, we continue to be optimistic for next year, doing better over this year.
Now, next year might be a good, might have a positive outlook, Nisha. And earnings so far relatively positive for the most part on this third quarter. But then Friday afternoon came, and a bit of a mixed bag for some of the conglomerates. Year-to-date profits for JG Summit, Alliance Global still lower, and the Lusiatan Group surprisingly doing well on higher tobacco sales. Could you give us your thoughts on the challenges facing these three conglomerates?
Okay, well, for Lusiatan Group of companies, I understand tobacco unit actually improved because they were able to finally raise prices from ever since the tax changes were implemented in 2013. I do think, however, that it's an industry that could plateau or actually slow down because of the new shift in a more healthy lifestyle. Other than that, though, Lusiatan Group of companies is still invested in beverage, which is also seeing a shift towards more positive, more healthy kind of lifestyle. So that would probably be the growth driver for that. Now, for Alliance Global, challenges remain in the casino sector, in the unit in the casino sector, and so I think we'll need to wait for recovery for that one. Meanwhile, we are optimistic on the Emperador unit because they're currently at a buyback. We think that share prices have bottomed out. We do think that there could be just a bit of a wait until they are able to kind of consolidate, digest a lot of the acquisitions that they've made. But we do think that it's a brand that's becoming quite strong globally. And what was that last company, sorry, JP, that you mentioned?
They reported net profits for the year down by about 7.9%, mostly on lower food sales as well as on their airline company.
Oh, JG Summit. Okay, right. So JG Summit, yes. Also, dividends have actually kind of gone down also from its stake in PLDT, but we do think that its stake in Meralco can improve moving forward, considering the fact that Meralco is increasing its generation portfolio. It's doing a very good shift, I think, towards retail electricity. Other than that, Cebu Pacific, the airline, I think we like what it's doing, that it's increasing airfares, and there's actually kind of a growing demand. There is some risk, however, in terms of, let's say, oil prices. I understand that they're actually thinking of not hedging anymore. Now, this could actually turn positively, although in the airline industry, it's a little bit more unpredictable. But for JG Summit, over the long term, we think that it's a good play. We do think that URC will improve eventually. It's just kind of still reckoning with the slowdown that happened in Vietnam, but also is kind of recovering from that as well. There's a bit more competition, but we do think that actually URC would be a very good pick over the long term. We're just seeing it kind of factor in poor earnings, at the same time also kind of looking forward to possible sugary tax. And so we'd like to wait on this, but we're definitely monitoring it very well.
Nisha, we seldom get to talk about some of the PSE small cap stocks, but we can't ignore what happened to Italpinas over the last couple of days. We saw share prices up more than 73% the last 2 trading days. And when you look at it, there's a report in the Inquirer that Udena's Dennis Oy might be in talks to actually acquire Italpinas. Do you think this might signal a short life for Italpinas on the PSE, given it only IPO'd in late 2015?
Well, okay, I saw the report, and it said that the CEO, Mr. Nadi, said that they're actually quite open to different talks, but there is nothing set in stone. Now, what's interesting about the PSEI, it actually has a very exciting backdoor listing kind of environment as well. And now this allows for companies that don't have the track record yet to come in as an initial public offering, to come in as a backdoor listing. For let's say projects that don't really have track records yet, for example, a casino operations and other businesses, what would actually be an interesting way to come into the market. But for IDC, however, of course, these are all speculations. It would be very hard to kind of give an opinion on what could happen to the company. We do think, however, that IDC has interesting expansion plans. They're going to micro township. They're also looking at, ever since its IPO, they're also looking into kind of expanding in other regions, other provinces aside from where they are today. A partnership with Dennis Oy would be interesting because he's been on an acquisition binge for a while, expanding into education through Underon, of course, a logistics company and then even the retail convenience store business, all of which are kind of synergistic with this companies today. So it'll be very interesting to monitor. But again, there is really nothing final about the deal, and so I would rather play prudent on speculative issues such as that.
It seems prudence might be the flavor over the next couple of days with the conglomerates and some of these small cap stocks. But we'll have to leave it there. Nisha Licer from DA Market Securities, thank you as always for your thoughts on Starting Gate. All right, well, taking a look at how the markets are doing at the open right now, we're seeing that the PSE, well, seems to be pretty on the way up at the moment. A quick look at some of the sectors on the local bourse. You're seeing property stocks leading the way. They're up by almost 1%. And the main index up to about 8,483 points. We're just about 17 points away from that 8,500 position. But as Nisha Licer mentioned a while ago, a correction isn't unfathomable when you look at the markets right now. Industrials also up by about 0.9%. And when we look at industrials, we have to look at a couple of companies that are in this particular space. Now, one company that just released earnings today, or this morning, is the Maxis Group. Now, Maxis, they did report today that 9-month profits, or for system-wide, 9-month system-wide sales were up by about 14%, and 9 months net income going up to about 421.7 million pesos to 11%. However, when you break that down, that puts third quarter profits at roughly the same as third quarter of 2016, 90.1 million pesos. So you're seeing that Maxis is really running off of the strength of their first half. We saw profits for the first and second quarter really outpacing and showing some impressive growth. And so far, this has been sustaining year-to-date growth in their profits. One thing they noted also is that as of January, they have launched about 58 new stores. So it seems just the expansion is starting to reap benefits for Maxis Group, and the share price is up to 18 pesos and 70 centavos. And also, we want to take a look at DNL Securities. Now, they did warn that they might be seeing some challenges throughout the rest of the year. But take a look at how DNL Industries did in the third quarter. Profits going up to by 15% to 771 million pesos. That's for the third quarter, and that puts 9 months net income up to about 2.1 billion pesos. In fact, DNL's leadership said that they are looking at they are targeting about 10% growth in profits year to date. That's according to a report from the Philippine Star. So far, DNL Industries also responding well, up to 10 pesos and 42 centavos. Back up to you guys.
All right, and now we're bringing you live pictures of President Donald Trump being welcomed into the CCP complex by President Duterte and Hanilet Avancenia. They seem to be having an engaging discussion. Of course, making the rounds on social media this morning is a clip posted by DSWD Undersecretary Karen Jimeno of President Duterte indulging a request from President Trump to sing, where he sang the song, the popular Pilita Corrales song, Ikaw. President Duterte has said he wants to talk to Trump about trade, terrorism, and China ties. They are scheduled for a bilateral meeting a little later on today. Moving on a little bit now to other stories, the ASEAN Mentorship for Entrepreneurship Network, or AMEN, which we were just talking about, has formally got off the ground during the launch at Soler on Sunday. In his speech, President Duterte promised to help small businessmen by amending next year's budget. Take a listen.
On this medium, small, and micro industry. So, you guys, the small businessmen, maybe a few billions here and there would suffice. Well, talagang bubuhos ako ng capital because we found out in our meetings with APIC that the basic unit of the economy has always been moved by the MSMEs.
More than 140 pioneer mentors across the 10 member states of ASEAN would comprise the first batch, which ASEAN Business Advisory Council Chair Joey Concepcion plans to eventually expand to 500 or even 1,000. On another issue, President Duterte said that President Xi Jinping made it clear during their meeting in Vietnam that the only way to deal with the South China Sea issue is through cooperation.
China is the #1 economic powerhouse. And we have to be friends. The South China Sea is better left untouched. Nobody can afford to go to war. I want to save lives. I do not waste the lives of my countrymen for a useless war that cannot be won by anybody. They made it clear to us that the only way to go is cooperation.
In the evening, Duterte hosted a gala dinner for the leaders of ASEAN and its dialogue partners at the SMX Convention Center. Some had their spouses in tow. The male leaders wore the traditional Filipino barong designed by Albert Andrada, while the female VIPs wore Filipiniana designed by the likes of Randy Ortiz, Rahul Laurel, as well as Andrada. In his toast, Duterte called for unity in the region.
I look forward to having constructive and substantive discussions with you, Your Majesty, and Your Excellencies in the upcoming meetings. Let us start on a positive note with tonight's celebration of ASEAN for 50 years. On this note, I wish to offer a toast to you, the unity, centrality, solidarity, and continued success of ASEAN, to ASEAN's achievement over the last 50 years, and the success of the 31st ASEAN Summit related. Mabuhay.
Well, President Duterte was seated beside U.S. President Trump and his partner Hanilet Avancenia. More than 1,000 guests feasted on ensaladang ubod, sinigang na maya-maya, beefsteak, and the Filipino dessert called budin. Later in the evening, Duterte sang a duet with Filipino singer Pilita Corrales. The relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines is back on track under President Donald Trump. That is according to Foreign Affairs Secretary Alan Peter Cayetano, who says there were some ill feelings between the previous administration and Duterte. Duterte and Trump have a meeting scheduled for today, and Cayetano says the two leaders will explore a possible free trade agreement as well as tackle ways to boost security. But joint patrols with the U.S. over the South China Sea are, quote, not in the books, according to Cayetano, because the Philippines wants to handle territorial issues with Beijing bilaterally. Before coming to Manila, Trump was in Vietnam, where he offered to help handle sea disputes and described himself as a, quote, very good mediator and a very good arbitrator. Cayetano says the Philippines welcomes the offer.
About President Trump's offer to mediate, we thank him for it. It's a very kind, generous offer because he is a good mediator. He is the master of the art of the deal. Having said that, we're making giant steps forward in talking about the code of conduct, about preserving marine life, about allowing fishermen who have artisan fishermen, their livelihood there, about having less Navy and more Coast Guards, and more cooperation. So there are a lot of positive developments. Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the issue is solved. I'm not saying the dispute has been resolved. I'm not saying there are no problems. I'm saying it's getting better.
Well, for more on what President Trump's visit means for U.S.-ASEAN and U.S.-Philippines relations, let me bring in my next guest. I'm speaking to Hans Vriens, managing partner at Vriens & Partners, live from Singapore. Hans, good to have you join us this morning. Let me kick off from that last story that we just ran, which is Trump offering to mediate on the South China Sea issue, calling himself a great mediator as well as a very good arbitrator. In response, the Philippine Foreign Affairs Department said it's a very generous and kind offer. What did you make of it?
It's very difficult to take it serious. I think we should see it in the same light as Trump's offers to mediate peace in the Middle East. So far, we haven't seen any follow-up besides sending his son-in-law over there. So I think this is just the usual empty words from this U.S. president that clearly has no strategy for Asia.
So you're not putting much by way of this kind of rhetoric, you think?
No, I mean, it's just empty. What does it mean? There's no, and it's very unlikely. There's no American strategy behind this to back up his words, and I don't expect China or any of the other claimant states to welcome such an erratic person who clearly never reads a brief, to mediate such a complicated dispute. I mean, that can never go well.
Well, the U.S. may not be a claimant to the South China Sea dispute, but it has always said, Washington's always said that it has strategic interests in the region, and it's always fought to uphold freedom of navigation. How do you think that may change under President Trump?
So, I mean, that's a very good question, and we don't really know the answer to that because the way Trump seems to be looking or dealing with Asia, he clearly, on the one hand, he wants everybody to support him on North Korea, and at the same time, he doesn't want to work with any of the countries in Asia on multilateral trade deals like the TPP he walked away from. I mean, it's very difficult to have your cake and eat it. But again, it's a clear illustration of a lack of a coherent strategy and a view of the US involvement in Asia. And as we have seen one thing in the last week during Trump's visit to Asia, despite the fact that he mostly was able to stay on message, it was a clear sign to what extent the US influence in Asia is declining. I mean, we see this now really playing out in front of us, the rise of China and the decline of US power, and it is very well illustrated by having really a clueless president like President Trump in the region, who clearly is being played by the Chinese, by the Koreans, and he doesn't even understand to what extent this is happening to him.
Hans, I find it interesting that you say that because we were just talking about this yesterday during our special coverage as well, about how President Trump, yes, on the one hand, he brought the tough talk to Asia, but on the other hand, he has been quite effusive in the way that he's described Beijing, for instance, and I read out some of his quotes. He said, for instance, he doesn't blame China for the trade deficit. He said he had an incredible evening with President Xi Jinping, that he won't forget it very soon. He will have something very meaningful. Likewise, when he was in Tokyo, on the one hand, he was slamming Japan for having, quote, winning the war on trade. But on the other hand, he's had, from all indications, he's had a very friendly visit with Prime Minister Abe. They went golfing, right? What do you make of all of that? How do we reconcile all of that?
Abe, of course, needs a strong US. By the way, and not only Japan, also Korea and perhaps Southeast Asia as a countervailing power vis-a-vis China. But Trump gets confused. He thinks it's about having a good personal relation with these leaders, and they actually they reciprocate that. What is unclear and what is not being articulated, what is the US strategy for Asia? What are its interests in Asia besides military? There's no economic vision for US involvement in Asia besides doing some deals and signing some MOUs. And so we haven't seen any of that. And that has really been shocking, that the US seems to be no longer be willing to play the leader of the free world, that is just only US first. And that clearly has shown that countries around the region can no longer count on the US as a major force for economic change in the region.
Well, Hans, what about the $250 billion in deals that President Trump worked out in China? I mean, we're talking deals with the likes of GE and Goldman Sachs and Boeing. You don't put much by it. I mean, I understand that a lot of it is non-binding and it may take a few years for them to materialize. But doesn't that count for something at least?
No, it's completely empty because it's mostly MOUs. There are no binding deals. But again, don't confuse some short-term deals with a long-term strategy. China is playing a very strategic long-term game in the region and is talking about integrating the region economically, talking about globalization, while Trump is just talking about some deals and building walls. So the two countries have very opposite and contrasting views about the future of the world. One power is expanding and helping, and the other is retreating, and basically has abandoned its role as leader of the world.
When President Trump says he will always put America first, and he said that to a room full of business executive and regional leaders in the APEC Leaders Summit in Vietnam, how do you think the audience reacted to that? How do you think they would take a message like that?
So I think quite badly, but it's again confirmation of his very narrow view of U.S. interest. And it's such a stark contrast to the U.S. view of its role in the world in the last 70 years, where the U.S. strength has really depended on its alliances, its many alliances, and treaties around the world. And just Trump is no longer interested in that. He just talks about America first. I mean, that seems to mean just retreating behind your borders and building a big wall and hoping for the best. While at the same time, of course, the world is changing faster than ever. Globalization is moving faster, and China very well understands this and seems to positioning itself very well to benefit from that, while and China is preparing for the 21st century with renewable energy, etc., while talking about coal, and is preparing the US for the 19th century.
Now, Hans, what are your expectations for the big meeting between President Duterte and President Trump later today? I mean, from all indications, from what we can see, they seem to have a far, shall I say, friendlier relationship than what Duterte had with former President Barack Obama. At the same time, President Trump is under pressure to raise the issue of human rights. U.S. Congress is pressing him about it. Amnesty International is pressing him about it. What do you make of it? What do you think he should walk away with at the very least?
I think he will walk away with very little. I mean, President Trump hasn't brought up human rights in China or in Vietnam, and I think he's extremely unlikely to do that in the Philippines. There may be some good personal chemistry between these two strongmen or autocrats. But beyond that, I think President Duterte understands he can expect economically more from China than the US. So they may have a nice meeting, but I think I don't expect much more than that.
All right, great insights. Hans Vriens, managing partner of Vriens and Partners. We thank you very much for joining us this morning and helping to shed some light on these news strands. All right, we're going to toss you now back live to live footage from the CCP, where the audience is getting settled in for the keynote speech of President Duterte. Take a listen.
Former Presidents Joseph Estrada and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, the Senate President Aquilino Pimentel III, and other members of the Senate present, Asian Secretary General Lee Leong Mi, honorable members of the Diplomatic Corps, Foreign Secretary Alan Peter Cayetano, and the other members of the Cabinet present, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Less than a month ago, Philippine government forces liberated the city of Marawi from terrorist groups. who pledge allegiance to the Islamic State. Resolute, we are now in the process of helping people back on their feet to claim their lives. We thank our international partners for providing assistance in dealing with the situation in Marawi City. Our ASEAN brothers provided support by sending relief items for the benefit of the internally displaced persons, while others provided valuable assistance and bolstered our military campaign. Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for setting the tone of my statement in such a manner, but I only want to emphasize that our meetings for the next 2 days present an excellent opportunity for us to engage in meaningful discussion on matters of regional and international importance. For example, terrorism and violent extremism endanger the peace, stability, and security of our region because these threats know no boundaries. Piracy and armed robbery in the seas put a dent on our growth and disrupt the stability of both regional and global commerce. The menace of illegal drug trade continues to endanger the very fabric of our societies. These and other issues are high on the agenda of our meetings, along with the other non-traditional security issues that challenge the prosperity of our economies, the integrity of our institutions, and more importantly, the safety of our people. Your Majesty, Excellencies, in the coming days, we shall be looking at the progress of ASEAN community building and the direction of what our cooperation with our dialogue partners, as well as that of the ASEAN-led mechanisms such as the ASEAN +3 and the East Asia Summit. I am pleased to announce that ASEAN member states have come to an agreement on the Asian Consensus on the protection and promotion of rights of migrant workers. I will be joining other ASEAN leaders tomorrow in signing this landmark document that would strengthen social protection, access to justice, humane and fair treatment, and access to health services for our people. Other which can be delivered that will see the fruition include those concerning health, women, and youth, terrorism, radicalization, and violent extremism, trafficking, poverty alleviation, food security, coastal and marine environment, and the pursuit of innovation for our economies, among others. Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a privilege for the Philippines to chair ASEAN during its milestone year. It has been a pleasure to work with our ASEAN family and our dialogue partners in moving the ASEAN community forward in enhancing cooperation in various areas. And in all of this, towards the realization of the ASEAN vision for 2025. On this note, it is my honor and pleasure to declare the 31st ASEAN Summit and its related summits open. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the opening of the 31st ASEAN Summit and related summits, we celebrate the unity of our peoples. We pursue linkages, forge partnerships, and celebrate the bonds that we foster for our peoples. We are connected by our common aspirations. And as we say in Filipino, magkaugnay. We are all connected.
Lupa, laot, langit ay magkaugnay. Hayop, halaman, tao ay magkaugnay. Ang lahat ng bagay ay magkaugnay. Magkaugnay ang lahat. Ang lahat ng bagay ay magkaugnay. Magkaugnay ang lahat. Ang lahat ng bagay ay magkaugnay. Magkaugnay ang lahat. Ang lahat ng bagay ay magkaugnay. Magkaugnay ang lahat. Tayo ay nakasakay sa mundong naglalakbay sa gitna ng kalawakan.
Within 4 hours of ASEAN, you have so much to see. In America, it's more or less the same. I'm sure you'll disagree, but it's more or less the same. But we have such depth. In Europe, it's more or less the same. So I do think bringing down the barriers have helped the people of ASEAN.
Fantastic. Very diplomatic, Tony. Let's move to Bakar. I mean, the kinds of lessons that India can teach us. I mean, first let's start from the Asian Development Bank. You know, how do you look at ASEAN? What are the challenges ahead for us?
Right, thank you, Maria. Let me start by saying that it's a pleasure and a privilege for me to be here in such august company, both on the dais and in the audience. Now, what is the objective? If I go by what we set out to achieve in ADB, we want societies that are free of poverty. We want societies that have less inequity or inequality. Now, what is the scorecard? So if we go by the history, what happened in the US, the UK, and Japan in the 1800s happened in Asia 100 years later. And you've had 3 times investment in transport networks. You have 10 times investment in energy. And we've lifted 1 billion people out of poverty. Now, so I agree with Tony that we have done well. ASEAN has done well. Now, but where are we today? So you have 400 million lacking electricity. 300 million don't have safe drinking water. 1.5 billion don't have basic sanitation facilities. So in other words, we have a long way to go. Now, how can this be done? So I think it's sort of become axiomatic that to get all this development across, you need infrastructure. An ADBI study shows that a 10% increase in energy actually increases exports of that economy by about 7%. A 10% increase in financial services has a kicker of 5%. And of course, transport, roads and all are more expensive. A 10% increase in transportation leads to a 2% increase in exports. In other words, and this is only one metric that we are tracking. So in other words, we need huge investment. Now, what is the investment gap? 26 trillion by estimates of ADB itself up to 2030 for all of emerging Asia, and literally 60 billion a year in this region for infrastructure to come.
Sorry, just to clarify, 60 billion, is that right?
Well, 60 billion, yes.
60 billion dollars.
60 billion.
That's how much we need to just catch up, correct?
That's right.
In Southeast Asia, guys, we got to find $60 billion, and ADB will give it. No, sorry, continue.
Well, you never know. So you know, with that kind of a requirement, where will the capital pools come from? So the good news is that there is a huge amount of money available. Emerging Asia saves 6 trillion a year. And the long funds, pension funds and all, pools of capital, 75 trillion is what is available. But what flows into infrastructure is barely 1%. So why does that happen? That happens basically because investors will only send in money where they are comfortable sending it. And in other words, you need to therefore create a matrix where the risk for investing is commensurate with the return. So I think there are a couple of things that need to be done in order to pull this infrastructure in. Basically, you will need to create conducive market conditions. And that means macroeconomic and political stability, proper dispute resolution, dependable laws and enactments, an enabling environment, dispute resolution. So those are the things that we will need to do. Their governments will have a very large role to play. The other problem is that most emerging markets have a very big problem with hedging dollars. You need strong local capital markets. So we need capital market reform where, Philippines is lucky because they are flush with local liquidity, Indonesia likewise, but there are many countries who don't have liquidity and who would be it would be difficult for them to borrow dollars, that would be expensive. So we need deeper capital market reform. That could be through innovative instruments, that could be through rating agencies, that could be through information communications technology, bourses, exchanges, and so on. That is. And the third pillar, which has already been touched upon by my co-panelists, this kind of money will not come from the government. You have to pull it in from the private sector, and there PPPs are an excellent way forward because they tend to leverage the relative strengths of both the parties. There are stuff like land acquisition, local laws, regulation, regulators, only governments can do. And then there is running business, which governments can't do. That has to be in private sector hands where efficiencies in execution can be leveraged. And I think that's really the way forward.
So let me pick up the public-private partnership since we haven't really talked about that yet. What is the most successful model? I mean, each country in ASEAN has tried this in different ways, correct? In your mind, which is the most successful? What are the traits that need to be there?
Well, it's very hard to say what is a successful model because, I come from India And India is a prime example where the PPP model for roads was great. And then suddenly one day it just came unstuck and you had everything. So it changes overnight. And it'll be hard to, but Malaysia has done a good job. Indonesia has done a fair amount on PPPs. Philippines is doing very well on PPPs. So they've, put together a very, very large amount in the last 15 projects, but it's continuously evolving, and challenges come at all points of time. As Tony mentioned, what are the challenges? They either come from vested interests. So if you want a water supply scheme, there could be a tanker mafia which won't allow you to operate, or it could come from just sheer inertia of a bureaucracy. So, things obviously need to change, but how will they change? It's interdepartmental, it gets referred from one place to another, you lose time, there is not enough continuity sometimes in the bureaucracy. Those are the challenges. Now, within that framework, you just need to, therefore, evolve models which will be equitable and which will be simple and dependable. And as I said, so there is no one size fits all, but we know exactly what is to be done. One big risk with PPPs is that one of the parties tends to transgress into the other's space. And that should not happen. In India, for example, it so happened that in the case of roads, land acquisition was left to private developers after a while. And now they can't do it. And so you languish.
Fantastic. Okay, I know I have two gentlemen still here. Tom, let's go to you next, yeah? Sorry. Oh, okay. So you are the only government official here on stage. So in your mind, I mean, what do you see? How do you look at Southeast Asia? And how did you choose the 4 countries that you did choose to put money in? And this would be Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, and Myanmar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. When I was invited to be on this panel and I saw Build, 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 it was brought joy to my heart, because that really is the heart and essence of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. For those that don't know, USTDA is the U.S. government's project preparation agency that is investing in the early critical infrastructure development focused largely on energy, transportation, and ICT. It's looking at how to design, finance a project, but do it in a way that, as my friend from JICA was saying, the quality. I think that that's the niche that U.S. Trade and Development Agency plays, and where we as an agency are getting a lot of traction, and particularly in the countries you mentioned, is we've got strong partners, both public sector and private sector. They're wanting to invest in infrastructure that's going to last the test of the time, looking at the total cost of ownership, the life cycle cost of investing. There's nothing inexpensive about investing the same thing twice. So we've seen a real uptick, particularly in Vietnam and here in the Philippines, of developing and investing in quality infrastructure. But also, before coming here, I think a lot of sitting in Washington, it's esoteric discussion of infrastructure development and doing the early project preparation. But before coming here, I was with the president in Da Nang, and we toured the Da Nang airport. That USTDA actually did the early project preparation that has really created a world-class airport that is supporting airlines around the region. And those are the types of programs that USTDA is investing in. And even here, I'm meeting later on today with an investment we've got for a geothermal power plant that is taking a little bit of U.S. taxpayer money, investing it in the early project preparation of a geothermal power plant, 100 megawatts, that's introducing U.S. technology, goods, and services to help them make an informed investment decision on bringing power to Luzon in the Philippines. And those are the types of investments that, as a U.S. government, we're making, and we're having great success. We've never been more active in the region, and we've never been more successful.
We're going to share this mic. USTDA is focused a lot on procurement, and from what Shinya had said, right, transparency in coming out with these things. How do you find the balance between build, 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 pushing for that, and making sure that the process is free from corruption? I'll give you an example. The last administration, the Aquino administration's first year, the GDP was choked because it was too slow in pushing forward PPPs. I mean, pushing forward infrastructure projects. How do you find that balance?
I think it's all about finding the right partners. Particularly on the quality infrastructure, we've been working closely here in the Philippines and in Vietnam, and we have strong procurement authorities that are recognizing that they have to do something different. Simply investing in lowest cost has not gotten them what they want. So a lot of it's our own due diligence, but it's also having strong partners that have a professionalization. They have to recognize that they're taking their own taxpayers' money and investing in their infrastructure, and they're being held in this more transparent environment to be responsive to their own community. So we've got strong partners that are making changes and they're seeing returns. I think early on we're seeing results around the world outside of ASEAN, in Colombia, in Panama, and Ethiopia, where the work we've done on procurement reform has already changed how they're approaching, and they're coming back to us saying, we're getting value. We're getting value that we didn't used to have when we were looking at simply the lowest, cheapest cost option.
And again, to just echo, PPP, right?
Yes.
Best case scenarios there.
PPPs, it's interesting. I think much like my colleague was saying, that every country is different. But I think at the end of the day, when we look at public-private partnerships, it all goes back to having transparency, sanctity of contract, sanctity of law, and a commitment on both sides. Because, you know, in public-private partnerships, they sound good, but at the end of the day, the public sector is giving something up. So they need to have a partner on the other side that's willing to go along and take it, but the public needs to be able to let that go a little bit to get the true economic benefit of the public-private partnership.
Fantastic. We have more. We should be talking more about that. The last but not least, Ricky, it's fun to hear his responses. So Ricky, third generation, his family has been, you are the third generation in terms of marine cargo handling. You know, as you've built your businesses from the 80s until now, you know, what things stood out and what problems do you want solved?
Well, I'd rather speak in the context of first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to Soler. I hope you're enjoying your stay here. For those who are staying here, enjoy our restaurant. Well, foremost, I would say, although the forum is the ASEAN, I'd like to focus really just on the Philippines. To be blunt about it, I'm not really concerned by what the other countries are doing for themselves. I'm more concerned about the Philippines, since we have a lot to do and a lot of catching up to do. Whether it be certain models, there's certain infrastructure which governments have to do. And there are certain other infrastructure projects which the private sector can do and participate. In our own business, as to answer your question, we've been a participant in really infrastructure and connectivity with the ports throughout our lives, for the last how many years, and in many countries. And some countries have experienced the same issues that others are. Some have other problems, some are at war, some are very prosperous. So it's hard to figure out really why some succeed and some don't. So I think that some of the other ASEAN countries have been ahead of us, some are behind, but we have to really, once and for all, focus and invest in our own infrastructure. We have one of the largest, I think second only to Indonesia in ASEAN. You know, ASEAN is a good thing. About 1 week every year, they have these big meetings. I've been seeing it for the last 25 years, and everybody is united, 600 million people in the market, but the other 51 weeks, nobody does anything about it. People just concentrate on their own business, which is, to me, is really what my country has to get down to doing.
I'm going to follow that up. Actually, if you look at the World Economic Forum, its latest report actually shows that the Philippines is third from the bottom just in front of Laos and Cambodia. How did we get to this point, and what should be done? I mean, now the government has build, but we still have to find how to move it forward, right? The concrete actions. What do you see?
Well, we got to that point with our own doing, no? We put ourselves in that point. And it's only us who can take us out of that. Nobody else can help us or do that for us. It's up to us. And my hope is that this administration is able to change the culture of how things get done in this country. The private sector, I think we have no problem. We're able, capable, and have proven that we can do things. So it's really the government organization that needs I use the word culture because that's what it is. It has to be, everybody's got to be on the same book on this. So until that happens, we'll be ahead of Laos and Cambodia.
So, you know what? I actually can't see our time. Okay, I think we have 1 minute left. Is that correct? Oh, okay. It's been. Sorry, you'll just have to tell me when the time is up.
We've been here a long time already. So.
I know. But to follow up, and I guess here I'll throw it open to the panel. You know, you've each in different ways mentioned transparency. Shin, Tom, you mentioned it. ADB, and each of the businessmen have mentioned it in different ways. What we've seen, though, in the last few years in ASEAN is a little bit of a rollback in both democratic reforms in some of the countries, and then greater charges of corruption in others. I won't name them all since we're being diplomatic. But beyond that, you know, how do we deal with this in ASEAN now? Can there be greater actions taken? Yeah, go ahead. Ricky, you start first.
I think the majority of ASEAN countries are not democratic. I think I slightly disagree with my Japanese colleague here. Philippines, though, is democratic. I say Indonesia, I get. Transparency is a tricky thing. For us, what's more important is to achieve and to reach an objective. If we focus on things like governance and transparency, we're still going to not get what we need to get done. My own view is that we need to build our infrastructure, our airports, our roads, the subway that JICA is, the JICA project, I think is the most important project for the Philippines. Second would be a new airport or several airports. So I think we have other things to worry about.
Okay, Jaime.
Yep, I guess building on Ricky's comments, one, you know, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the financing needs are going to be tremendous. And of course, you can have your own government public funds come in, and you've got private sector funds. But in the end, I think we're going to get serious private sector funding, both and also from the multilaterals and from foreign investment coming in. You have to have a global set of standards that you live by. And I think when you're talking about governance and transparency, that's what it's all about. Our country is still low on the FDI list. We are not getting our equal share of foreign direct investment, but the potential definitely is there. And I think structures like the TPP, originally started by the US, or RCEP, initiated by China, is a way of getting our standards to come together. And I think one of the great moves that ASEAN is trying to make is to basically standardize the rules and regulations that govern the way we work. I think it is important to us to be able, as a country, to attract the investments necessary to bridge the gap in the kind of funding that it's needed to get our infrastructure up to its different level. That needs cooperation from all of us. A set of standards that we can all live by across ASEAN would help tremendously in creating that comfort level.
Fantastic. Tom, I'm going to pull you up on that.
Sure, thank you. I think on the transparency, you know, that's not unique to the ASEAN. It's something that you have to do. I think what we've seen over the last 12 days, traveling throughout Asia, is the tremendous economic growth that's taking place in the public sector in all of the countries we visited. And as the economic growth has come up, these new businesses, entrepreneurs, small businesses are now becoming medium business becoming large businesses. And they're taking, we've got better partners than we've ever had before. We've got better companies to work with and companies that are willing to make investments in their countries, which is, you know, as I said at the beginning, we've never been as diverse or as engaged in South and Southeast Asia as we are right now. And I think a lot of it's because it's on the right track. And you've got companies that are moving up the economic ladder and they're wanting to invest in their countries. And they're turning increasingly to the U.S. Trade and Development Agency as a vehicle to help them get the connections to U.S. companies, U.S. technologies, U.S. goods and services to help make those informed investment decisions for their infrastructure development.
I'm going to follow up on this, and I may toss this to Tony because I like giving you hard questions. What we've seen globally, it seems, right, is in many ways democracy has failed. At least if you look at a movement towards towards leaders. We'll talk about our countries, towards leaders who have greater sense of where they want to go, right? Has liberal democracy failed? If it's failed, elections in many of the countries has shifted it towards more strongman type rulers. The people, not enough has gone down to the people. The people's airline, right? Has enough gone down, and is democracy, as we've been saying on the panel, is that the only way to actually build, or are other systems of government as effective?
Well, I think it really depends. I mean, some countries, obviously, which have very strong leaders, they cut through the bureaucracy and things go very quickly as well. But I do believe in the long run, democracy is the only way forward, and a free press is the only way for a check and balance, etc. So governments in ASEAN will have to find a balance between transparency and moving things quicker. Just one more thing. Infrastructure is always a grandeur project. And in airports, for instance, everyone's talking about the biggest, highest, longest runway, etc. But really, for me, infrastructure is also building smaller things quickly. So we could build 40 airports in the Philippines and provincial areas very quickly and start stimulating the economies outside of Manila, while the solution on Manila is being sought, which I believe is Clark, and we should have a railway to Clark, and you've got a fantastic airport there, and build a highway through to Clark as well. But anyway, that's another issue. But sometimes I find when I sit in these infrastructure panels, people are always talking about massive infrastructure, but actually there's hundreds of little things that can be done to really grow local economies quickly. So for instance, for us, we want low-cost airports, which can cost, between $100 to $200 million, as opposed to a huge new airport, which is 5, 6, 7 billion. So again, infrastructure isn't just a massive project, but also smaller projects like what was mentioned about Da Nang, etc., where we're going to base our airline there for a start.
It was fascinating to see what Da Nang has actually done. Devata, let me throw to you the tricky questions of ownership in each of these countries, right? Some of our countries, many of these things are only for nationals. Again, it goes back to the isolationism and not actually being able to pull the group together. What do you see working in getting rid of that? Can ownership, critical utilities like transportation and power, can ownership of that, are our nations ready to let go of some of that and open it to everyone?
I sincerely feel that the issue is not so much about who owns. The issue really is about what is the governance framework and structure around that. So, we live in a real world, and the real world is beset with a lot of...
To make their way out of the Tanghalang Nicanor Abelardo, their spouses shall be conducted to the first floor gallery of the Cultural Center of the Philippines.
All right, we're now back for live footage of the CCP, where the world leaders are being ushered off into the formal dialogue sessions, just falling out now. First up, I believe the Philippines and rather the U.S. The U.S. President Donald Trump has a bilateral meeting with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. A little later on today, President Duterte is also expected to engage in a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Trump.
Ladies and gentlemen, we request everyone to please take their seats. Thank you.
It's just 10:30 this morning on a Monday, and already so much has happened. We'll be bringing you more updates on the 31st ASEAN Summit and related meetings throughout the day. Keep it here on Bloomberg TV Philippines, your only source for all things ASEAN. Stay with us.